This slideshow is going to cover Lesson 3 on relationship abuse. I'm going to go ahead and expand this screen, and if you guys can turn to page 20 in your packet. All right, first off, a reminder. Please remember our group agreements about being respectful, different viewpoints that might be shared, things that are and are not okay to keep confidential, and so on. As we cover this topic of relationship abuse, please be understanding that this is a difficult topic for students. It might be a difficult topic for you. I understand that. Please be respectful. And if you have any concerns, you're welcome to send me an email. All right, so most of our lessons start with a preview story. What I'd like you to do is read the story on page 20 and then come back and let's go over the 3 questions together. So I'll read the story to you, and then I'll pause for you to complete the questions on your own. Trinity's older sister asked her what she had been studying in school. Trinity explained that today the teacher discussed love and intimacy and how to form healthy relationships. Suddenly, her sister became very quiet, and Trinity thought she could see tears in her sister's eyes. Finally, her sister said, "You're going to start dating soon, and there's something I need to tell you. I made some pretty serious mistakes in my relationship with my boyfriend, and I hope you never do the things I did." Trinity sat silently as her sister shared how she never trusted her boyfriend and was always checking up on him. She even checked his email and cell phone messages to see if he had been with someone else. This would often result in an argument between Trinity's sister and her boyfriend. Her sister would yell at him, call him names, and even push or hit him. Her sister would eventually calm down and apologize. But then the whole cycle of mistrust and arguments would repeat itself in a few weeks. After a few months of experiencing this abuse, the boyfriend finally broke up with her sister. So the questions for you to respond to are on page 20. Briefly summarize the facts of the story. What are the signs that Trinity's sister was in an unhealthy relationship? And why do you think the boyfriend stayed with her sister at all? So I want you to pause the screencast and respond to those questions. Okay, let's review. I don't necessarily have all of the correct answers or all of the possible answers, but these are just some of the ways you might have answered this section. So the facts of the story. Well, we know that Trinity has an older sister. We know that Trinity's sister was in an unhealthy relationship with her boyfriend. We could have mentioned some of the things that Trinity's sister did, like checking his phone. We know that Trinity's sister's boyfriend eventually broke up with her. Number 2, what are some of the signs that Trinity's sister was in an unhealthy relationship? Well, she didn't trust her boyfriend. She was checking his email and phone. She was yelling at him, name-calling, pushing, and hitting. And third, why do you think the boyfriend stayed with his sister for as long as he did? When it comes to abusive relationships, many people stay because they're more afraid to leave. So he might have been more afraid of what would happen if he left rather than staying and putting up with the abuse. He might have also believed that this behavior was normal. Maybe he grew up in a household where he saw people treating each other this way. So maybe that's all he knew. Maybe he thought that he could fix her and change her. There's many reasons. Those are just a few ideas. All right. In this lesson, I hope you will be committed to end bullying and inappropriate sexual behavior in yourself and others. Identify risky sex-related behaviors, such as sex trafficking, sexting, and making sexual advances without permission. And demonstrate a variety of ways to protect yourself. Identify how to respond to inappropriate sexual behaviors. How will we know that you achieve this? You complete the activities in your packet. You're committed to forming healthy, non-abusive relationships. All right, so let's get started. On the top of page 21 is where we're going to start filling in the blanks. So the first word is consent, and it says on the top of our screen here, yes means yes. That is all about consent. So consent is this. Please write out our definition. An agreement between participants to engage in sexual activity. You need to know what that means. You need to know consent. All right, let's move on here. Healthy relationships include open communication, respect, and consent. And as we're covering relationships today, I know this is sex ed, and so you might be thinking of sexual sort of relationships, but honestly, most of this content can be relevant and can be useful for all types of relationships, people that we call friends, sometimes even family members. All right, so again, healthy relationships include open communication, respect, and consent. The absence of no does not mean yes. So just because somebody doesn't say, no, I don't want to have sex with you, does not mean they're saying yes and giving their consent. Impaired partners cannot give consent. So if a person is drunk or high or otherwise intoxicated, and they say yes because of that, that is not consent. If you're, if you're forced to have sex, raped, or molested, tell a trusted adult. Any act of sexual intercourse requires verbal consent by both partners. And please remember, it is okay to change your mind. It is okay to maybe start to get physically involved with another person and then realize this is not what I want and stop the situation. It's also okay for a person or a couple, let's say, to maybe have intercourse. And if it comes up again later in that relationship, it's okay to say, nope, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not okay with that. All right, I'd like you to watch this video on consent. If you can go back into the slideshow and watch this. The lights just went off. It's a real great look at describing what consent is all about. All right, moving on. How to report a sexual assault. So this means that a person was raped, somebody forced sex on them without their consent. So how do we report that? So contact your local police or sheriff. Seek medical treatment, which might include collecting evidence and emergency contraception. If we seek medical treatment earlier rather than later, we might be able to obtain evidence that can be useful to convict another person. Evidence could be things like body fluids, head hair, pubic hair. It could be skin, scratching skin under your fingernails. And if we seek treatment within 72 hours of the sexual assault, emergency contraception might be available in the case where it's possible that one person would become pregnant because of that sexual assault. Contact a school counselor, school nurse, social worker, or another trusted adult. And for additional support, here is the National Sex Assault Hotline and a website that you can go to for more assistance as well. All right, on the next page, we have our Teen Dating Bill of Rights. So it says, remember always that you have these rights and that you deserve them. Believe in yourself and settle for nothing else. So when it comes to a dating relationship, every person has the right to all of these things. I'm just going to read through them real quick. I have the right to trust myself above all others. Trust yourself, your beliefs, your values. Trust your instincts as well. I have the right to be respected by anyone I date. I have the right to refuse to date anyone. I have the right to be safe on a date. I have the right to be assertive on a date. I have the right to pay my own way on a date. I have the right to refuse sex or any other kind of physical intimacy with my date. I have the right to disagree with my date. I have the right to say no. I have the right to be happy with myself, with or without a partner in my life. I have the right to know who I'm dating. I have the right to use my own transportation on a date. I have the right to leave any dating situation when my instincts tell me to leave. I have the right to protect myself against battery and sexual assault. I have the right to a healthy dating relationship. I have the right to be loved. I have the right to be cared about. I have the right to high self-esteem. I have the right to speak up when my rights are being violated. And there is room for you to write any other items that would be important for you. So this would be something to just review and think about as you are spending time with people. Some of you might be starting to date, some of you might not be, but these are all very important things to remember. And if a person is trying to abuse any of these rights, that could be a sign that this is an unhealthy relationship. There is a video linked on this next slide regarding abusive relationships. I'm going to skip to the next slide real quick. So if you go back to watch that video, try to identify some of the signs of abuse, of an abusive relationship from the video. And did anything in that video surprise you? So just pay attention to those 2 points as you go back and watch the video. Moving on with relationship violence, let's cover some facts about relationship violence. All right, top of page 23. Unhealthy relationships can start early and last a lifetime. Dating violence is a widespread issue that has serious long-term and short-term effects. Among high school students who date, 21% of females and 10% of males experience physical and/or sexual dating violence. Among adult victims of rape, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner, 22% of women and 15% of men first experienced some form of partner violence between the ages of 11 and 17. Youth who are victims are more likely to experience symptoms of depression and anxiety, engage in unhealthy behaviors like tobacco, drugs, and alcohol, or exhibit antisocial behaviors and think about suicide. So obviously, this is a really serious issue. So what can we do? Well, we can make sure that we recognize some of these signs of abuse, and if we start to see them pop up in a relationship that we're in, we should end the relationship. We should get help. This slide, this is the diagram on the bottom of page 23, demonstrates the wheel of power and control. So I'm actually going to skip ahead one slide. Well, if you can make your picture look like this, if you can kind of connect the circle. And then on the next slide, it says to label the 4 types of abuse. So label one circle sexual abuse, one circle emotional abuse. I'll go back so you can see that. So sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and verbal abuse. And now what I would like you to do, I'm going to go ahead one slide. The second bullet here, after we have that diagram labeled, it says to classify the behaviors on the next slide as physical, emotional, verbal, or sexual abuse. I would like you to write down at least 2 examples for each of those categories of abuse. So 2 examples of sexual abuse, 2 for emotional abuse, 2 for physical, 2 for verbal. Now, some of them you might be a little confused and you might think they could go in a couple of sections, and they probably can. Maybe try to pick out ones that are more obvious to you then, or things that just surprise you. Whatever will help you remember examples for each of these types of abuse. So this is the big list here. All right, so I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment and try to identify at least 2 examples for physical abuse, verbal, sexual, and emotional abuse, and then we will move on. Okay, moving on. You might have examples that are different from mine, but these are just some things you might have written next to sexual abuse. Refuses to use birth control, rapes you, refuses STI testing, refuses to wear a condom, forces unwanted sex acts, disrespect. Now, as I said, many of those could go into some of the other categories as well. Some examples of emotional abuse could be isolating you from friends, checking your phone records, monitoring your texts, spreading lies about you, monitoring your location, disrespect. Physical abuse could be things like pulling your hair, hitting you, tearing your clothing. And verbal abuse could be things like criticizing you often, calling you names, and putting you down. So any of those would be considered warning signs, and again, a sign that you would be in an abusive relationship. So please do not think that these are normal. Even if you've seen these happen in other relationships, these are signs of abuse. So this would be a point where you would want to get help. Moving on to the top of page 24. Remember that healthy relationships, both sexual and non-sexual, revolve around mutual respect, open communication, and consent. So this even means with your friend group, not even with a dating relationship or an intimate relationship. Even with your friends, there should be mutual respect, there should be open communication, and there should be consent to do activities, not necessarily sexual activities, of course. Relationships that reflect or contain any of those abusive relationships are unhealthy and should be changed or ended. Okay, we're moving on to the topic of sexual harassment. And this is when a person makes unwanted sexual advances to someone, causing sex-related discomfort for another person through their words or actions. Sexual harassment can be the grounds for punishment. It can be the grounds for dismissal at school or work. It can also be the grounds of lawsuits. Sexual harassment could look like verbal harassment, including taunts, name calling, and making sexual comments. Physical harassment, like touching somebody inappropriately, pinching them, poking them. It could be visual harassment, such as posting sexually explicit photos or drawings in the workplace or at school. And that also might mean sending pictures. Sexual harassment, again, can be the grounds for punishment and dismissal from work or school. The tricky part about sexual harassment, if I go back right here, unwanted sexual advances, causing discomfort. Here's the hard part about sexual harassment. You don't get to decide what makes me feel uncomfortable, right? So maybe, let me flip it around. Maybe I'm okay telling sexual jokes and spreading rumors and touching people in funny spots. Maybe I'm okay with that. I just think it's all fun. But somebody else might be feeling uncomfortable by that, and that can be considered sexual harassment. All right. There's a couple of examples here on sexual harassment. You could watch those 2 videos on your own. They're both very short, like 30 seconds each. So what do we do if somebody is making us feel uncomfortable, if we are the victim of sexual harassment? So first of all, you have to communicate. Remember, communication is important in every sort of relationship. So specifically, we need to communicate what we're feeling and that we expect the behavior to stop. Unfortunately, when we don't communicate, some people perceive that as us giving permission. If we aren't saying no, it's kind of like we're saying it's okay. So how do you communicate this? You can do this verbally. I think that is most effective, but sometimes that's really hard. You could also do that in writing. You can also get the help from a friend, a parent, a professional, or another trusted adult. If the harassment continues, what do you do? So step 2 is to go to a person in authority. Depends who you are. If it happened in a classroom, you would probably first, step 1, confront the classmate, and then step 2, go to the teacher. Maybe it's a principal, maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a manager or supervisor at work. So go to somebody in authority and make sure all along the way you are documenting what happened and what you did about it. Make sure you always keep a copy of this. So maybe you're making a note in your phone or writing it in a journal. And if it continues past this point, step 3 is to just keep going higher. Go to a person in higher authority. So maybe we went to the teacher, it's still happening. So now maybe we go to administration. After that, maybe we take it to the school board and so on. All right, the next section covers internet safety. So these are some tips for staying safe online. First off, just be careful, kind of like, your physical safety, like we want to avoid dangerous places, kind of the same thing online. So try not to visit dangerous places like pornographic websites. Try not to participate in chat rooms or conversations where there is a sexual content or militant content being discussed. And don't start a relationship with a stranger online. Do not send or receive nude pictures of yourself or others. That is called sexting. And a little bit more information on sexting. Sexting is sending or receiving nude or provocative photos via text or anything online on social media, perhaps. This is punishable with a fine. You can be charged with a felony. You might end up being labeled as a sex offender. A felony conviction can label you as a sex offender for life, and that might prevent you from being able to apply for many jobs in the future down the road. If a person does send you inappropriate pictures, your first response might be to delete it. And I understand that, but when you do so, you are deleting the evidence. So rather than delete it, I would go back and go to a person in authority, get a trusted adult involved to help you handle that. All right, the last section is on sex trafficking. Our entire next lesson will cover sex trafficking. So this is just a little bit of information. Sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transport, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act. A commercial sex act means it's a sex act on account of which anything of value is given to or received by another person. So the obvious one could be money, but depending on who you are and what's important to you, that item of value could be something like taking you to get Dutch Bros or Starbucks. Sex trafficking is punishable by a prison sentence of up to 5 years. And if the victim is under the age of 18, that prison sentence can be up to 8 years. To report sex trafficking, if you're witnessing something happening, call 911. You can also call the National Runaway Hotline number. So you have the phone number there as well as their website. And I'm also providing the National Human Trafficking Hotline number for you. All right, this is not even in your packet, I believe, so we're not going to worry about this one. But let's do the wrap up. So true or false? Number 1, the need for power and control can cause relationship abuse. That is true. Typically, the abuser wants to be in control. Number 2, true or false? Abusive relationships include put downs, dishonesty, and threats of or physical harm. That is true. Number 3, calling someone a fag is a form of sexual harassment. And that is true. Remember, it can be verbal, and if it makes somebody uncomfortable, it is harassment. Number 4, if a friend or partner treats you poorly, it is best to ignore it and just hope they change. And that would be false. If you ignore it, you're not speaking up, it's probably just going to continue. It's almost like you're giving them permission to treat you this way. And just like that dating Bill of Rights, everybody deserves to be respected and treated properly in all sorts of relationships. All right, I want you to think about the most important or interesting thing that you learned in this lesson on relationship abuse. How likely is it that you would protect yourself against an abusive relationship? So if some of those signs started to show up in a relationship you were in, do you think you would be able to speak up, get somebody involved, end the relationship? This is not an assignment, but if you like, you can review the worksheet pages, the packet pages with your parents, maybe go over the dating Bill of Rights. Maybe they have some other ideas that should be included on that list. And maybe you can talk to your parent, ask a parent or guardian to tell you what they want you to do if a boyfriend or girlfriend treats you poorly. All right, and that concludes our slides on relationship abuse. Please make sure your packet is complete up to page 24.